Okay, everybody, here we are. We're going to continue the rest of the semester, at least until we hear something different, online. So I'm recording lectures to go with the PowerPoints. And of course, I'll put up more materials for you to work on. But anyway, we had finished the stuff about the West. We don't go into a lot of detail about the West. We talked a little about the gold rush and some of the things that had to do with that. But this part is really one of my favorite parts of the whole class. When we get into the part that we call exploring new territory, wow. Okay, we're going to talk about all these different ways that people tried to fight things like, legitimate diseases, but also what they called hysteria. I remember I mentioned this in class at least once or twice, that you don't usually ever hear a man being called hysterical. That's generally reserved for us. So we're going to talk about the hysterical women, and I've got down there at the bottom of this slide cures and ailments in quotes, because are they really cures and are they really ailments? Probably not. Okay. So bear with me. If you have any questions, please email me anytime. Okay. So let's move on with this. Okay, so what we see here is in the first half of the 19th century, American women seemed like they were pretty darn sickly. Okay, the question is, were they really? Now, by a lot of times, estimates and things that we look at statistically, we see that maybe a quarter, a full 25% of American women of the middle and upper classes, keep that in mind. Like I've said, middle and upper classes can get away with a lot of stuff that regular working people don't, right? So you've got about a quarter of them laid up, which I love. I love that term. In other words, they're keeping to their rooms, they're laying on the couch, weekly receiving visitors. Or my favorite thing is when they go from one health spa to another. Okay. And you're going to see these health spas are anything but healthy. So I'll tell you, one of the things that I found is, remember our friend Catherine Beecher? Well, Catherine Beecher, she had conducted a study. Well, I would put study in quotes too if I were writing that on a PowerPoint. But she had conducted a study that was not at all scientific as far as the scientific method goes and statistics. But here's what she did. She took a survey of about, I don't know how many women. It was in 200 different communities. And she only found two towns or cities, areas, where the women said that they felt well. Okay, so the women in the upper and middle classes, they're sick. But as I said, are they really? Well, there's a lot of illness going around at that time. I mean, there's no denying that. There's malaria in the South. There's consumption. Now, what's consumption? I actually stopped to take a drink, but I would do that if we were in class. I would say, okay, what is consumption? Well, that's tuberculosis. Okay, you're going to have that up in the north. That's going to come back, several times to hit us in the United States. And typhoid and cholera epidemics in the cities. Now, the problem with the cities is it's so nasty, right? You're going to have these stagnant pools of just, standing water. So Americans, in the true sense of the word, feel like, man, we are just a bunch of sick people, particularly the women. Again, were they really though? reality check. Americans are not more disease prone than any other group. Okay, they were not at that time. Now, in some places, they lived longer than average. Now, up in the Northeast, again, you've got some of the most, I guess, at that time, some of the most advanced places. We're talking up there, Philadelphia and so on, New York City. But you're going to see that in the rural Northeast, in the countryside, you saw the lifespan for the average woman or man being pretty long in the rural Northeast in particular. Okay. Now, the thing is, too, when you talk about mortality rates, one of the mortality rates that I quote quite frequently is that in the year 1900, if you were born, if you were a baby boy, your average life expectancy would be 47, right? And you go back in time, and you have a lot of men and women who lived to ripe old ages, but the average mortality rate is just exactly what it says, the average age at which people will die. And that is brought down through history by childbirth. Okay, either the babies, the infant mortality, which a lot of times they would pull out, and sometimes they would add it in the total, but also women dying in childbirth because there weren't the the medications, the sterilization, the cleanliness that we expect today, right? So in 1840, if we go right to that moment in time, women's life expectancy was still a lot greater than men's life expectancy. So why did they think they were so sick? I don't know. I mean, it seems like somewhere around this time, the upper and middle class women were kind of allowed to complain a little bit more, if that makes sense. You're going to hear them complaining to each other in their private letters and in their diaries more than you've really ever heard in history. Now, what I think it is what I have on the slide right here. Up until that time, pretty much everybody was in some kind of pain. It's something you lived with. You expected it, right? There were no aspirins. There were no Tylenol. There was nothing. You were walking around, if you lived to a certain age and you had a really hard life, especially the working class, your body was broken down and you were aching somewhere. You were hurting somewhere all the time. Well, that had started to change, especially the women. Okay. Now, why is it going to be that way? Well, there's a lot of factors. As I said, they're increasing some of their medical knowledge, but not nearly what it is today. And I mean, I have to mention the fact that we're living in a global pandemic today tells us that, of course, we're never going to reach a time where it's just, you know, perfect, where everyone's going to be safe from everything. But again, go back to the 1800s and imagine, okay? This is also a time where, when germ theory was coming up, the idea that there were microscopic things that could cause people to get sick, when that was coming up, doctors in large numbers rejected that. So keep that in mind, okay? So, people had been in constant pain. So what we see here is in the early 1800s, and let me change slides now. I'm going to start trying to tell you when to change the slide because I took it off the timer. It's much easier, I think, this way to just tell you. So go to the next slide with your mouse. Okay. So what we see is the number of doctors had increased. Now, when there's more and more and more doctors increasing, and we think it was about 4 times as fast as the population in the early 1800s. Think about that. 4 times faster than the population was growing. The number of doctors were growing. That's crazy. So think about it economically. You know, it's best for the doctors if people start to feel like it's their right to feel good, to not have pain all the time. So it's also to their benefit at that time to make as many illnesses as they can possibly discover known to the American people, right? So again, the women are really going to be at the heart of this, because the women, a lot of times in the upper class and the middle class, are staying home by this point. Remember, working women are still working, but the middle class and the upper class, they're staying at home. And sometimes, to be perfectly frank with you, some of them are bored. Okay. So we have at the very beginning up here, at the first bullet point, some of these things they start to say are psychological. Again, some of them were, symptoms like the Salem witchcraft girls, psychological. In other words, it's nothing physically wrong with you. So we might call, we might call that a lot of things today, but one thing we would probably put it under in a big, broad kind of umbrella would be anxiety, some kind of anxiety disorder, something, like generalized anxiety disorder, or others that you could look up. But they're going to label it hysteria. Okay, hysteria. Okay. Now, what is hysteria? Well, they say hysteria is going to be a nervous disorder that, according to one of the diaries, I'm still, trying to pull up some stuff to read to you from some diaries, quote, "Let the reader imagine the patient writhing like a serpent on the floor, rending her garments to tatters, plucking out hands full of hair and striking her person with violence, contorted and swollen countenance, and fixed eyes resisting every effort of bystanders to control her." Now, this actually wasn't from a diary particularly. I think it may have started there. I don't know, but it ended up being published, and this was from a doctor. Okay. So imagine he's talking about the way you could describe these women with hysteria, these hysterical women. Now, hysteria is generally going to suffer, cause suffering at the prime of their lives too. And what ends up happening, they're going to end up with all these tangible things that you can see, like nervousness, depression, fatigue, a general weepiness. Now, we know that a general weepiness, that's also part of depression, right? And kind of being on the verge of tears all the time. And if you have anxiety or depression, generally speaking, you have both of them. They're the two sides of the same coin. They work together, really. So you're going to see the doctors calling this, hysteria. So most patients are going to have these very vague symptoms. Again, the things that we just mentioned. The fatigue, that's still something that's very vague today. But a lot of the women actually did have some physical problems. Now, I used the word tangible up there in the second bullet. Tangible just means that it's real. I'm never going to tell anyone that their nervousness, depression, and fatigue are not real, as well as being on the verge of tears, because as someone who's very open about it, I have depression and anxiety. So those things are tangible too. But in number 3, in bullet point number 3, many of the women were suffering from tangible, real physical problems, right? Things like tuberculosis. Now, as I said, that's going to come back several times to the United States. It's an it's a big killer. I read a book in graduate school called. Okay, now let me finish up what I was saying though about menstruation. It was usually seen as danger, right? Now, here's what we find. We find that during the time of having a period, women, you're going to love this. Women, they said, lost the blood to their brains. Yeah, I know, right? Okay, they lost the blood to their brains, and they basically said that it left us idiotic or even temporarily insane. Just take a second to kind of think about that, leaving us insane. So how are we going to fix menstruation? Well, the doctors would say, I always have to stop, just like if I'm in class, I always have to stop and sigh before I tell you some of these things. But early onset of menstruation was seen as a sign that maybe a girl was oversexed. Again, stop and think about that for a minute. Come on, you guys. And a lot of doctors told parents, if you've got a daughter who has not hit puberty yet, if she's not suffered yet from the curse, keep her on a vegetarian diet. That'll slow it down. Okay, doctors, that sounds great. Now, what was their reasoning for that? Well, it's not very scientific. It's not actually any science behind this. They said meat was sexually stimulating. Yeah, again, take a moment to process that. No matter what a woman's problem was, so often everything from having a backache to a stomach ache to a headache to it doesn't matter what, to tuberculosis really. A lot of times they diagnose some kind of a problem with menstruation, your period. Okay, so wow. Now, it's not funny, but I have to tell you that one of the professors, this is a guy who was teaching medical students at this particular moment in time. Okay. He was known for writing that it is as if the Almighty, in creating females, took a uterus and built a woman around it. Okay, I'm going to leave that just right where it stands. Okay. Now you have a lot of other things, that we could talk about as far as tuberculosis and the fact that you have, the classic ways they would try to fix physical ailments like leeches. We've all heard of that. That's ancient. Blistering, right? Making blisters come, burning and so on. And opium. Opium was a big deal right then. There were some people who had actually grown their own leeches so they could treat themselves. Okay, now remember, leeches are these blood-sucking worms because they believed in the ancient world and in medieval times, they believed in bleeding. They would cut you until you lost some blood and letting out the bad blood. Leeches were sucking out the bad blood. So, that's a thing. You had these cures that are starting to come up that are very sometimes dangerous. Now, sometimes they're not so much dangerous as they are useless. That's where I'm going to take you to hydropathy. Okay. So health reform is going to be vital to a lot of women activists. And in walks hydropathy, AKA the water cure. Now, again, this is ancient. This is a thing that had been happening forever because throughout a lot of history, you didn't really drink water so much as you drink alcohol because water had been known to be a source of something, right? We didn't always know what caused tainted water, but we knew a lot of times that if you drink water, it's going to be dangerous. So eventually we're going to be boiling water and we're going to be doing other things. But this is a very ancient thought. So in the 1790s, we have Dr. James Curry. Now, Curry is going to be known as one of the big proponents of the water cure, hydropathy. He wrote about using both hot and cold water to treat darn near anything. Now in 1804, Professor Oratel, he's going to... All right, so different doctors are springing up in addition to these hydropaths. And they're going to have all sorts of different ways. But ultimately, if you look at the very last bullet, the cure, okay, and the spa movement. These are the two kind of, I would say, what, buzzwords of the time. So different doctors, and again, these are not medical doctors. Like James Curry, he actually was a medical doctor, even though he promoted hydropathy. But we're going to see hydropaths joined by homeopaths. Now, homeopathy today, if you ask medical doctors and you look it up enough, you'll see that homeopathy is where you take natural remedies, where you just have a little bit of whatever it is, some kind of medicine. Generally speaking, from my understanding of science and my studies about homeopathy, it doesn't usually hurt people unless you're taking something that could interact with one of your prescription medications or some other herb or something like that. But it's generally not going to help you either. Okay, a lot of times the homeopathic cures or medicine, in quotes, is generally going to be placebo, right? So homeopathy is something that has kind of come back again today, but you have to be really careful with that. Okay, so anything basically that says it can treat everything usually isn't really able to treat anything. That's what I've read from a lot of doctors. Anyway, then you have the botanical movement. So that basically, hey, you can treat yourself better than the doctors could. Now, there is some truth to that. I mean, we all have to admit, if you look at the second big bullet point, exercise, sunlight, temperance, and a sensible diet. Of course, I mean, that's got to be a part of everything. But I mean, when you're sick, when you have something wrong physically that's either getting worse or not going away or whatever, it's okay to go and seek out help from an actual medical physician. Although it's a little bit more difficult right now for us, we have other, we have other ways that we have to think about this in terms of, do I need to go to a doctor? If I go to a doctor today and, right here in March of 2020, in the middle of the, COVID-19 outbreak, are we going to expose ourselves to more sickness than if we just do exactly what we've been told will stop the curve of this or flatten the curve of this thing, which is, stay home as much as we can. But still yet, exercise. Today we can go for a walk, even though we're not supposed to be in big groups of people and whatever. We can go for a walk. We need sunlight. Temperance, of course, being moderate with everything. And of course, that includes diet. So that's all realistic. You can treat yourself in a preventive way, very much so. Now, where you get a little crazy, the leeches and drinking, a gut full of water and all that for the cure, but they go even crazier. Okay, some of these doctors, again, quote, doctors, meaning guys that a lot of times were just trying to get your money, right? They would have you leaping into cold water and being massaged in wave baths and all kinds of things. And you're going to have these women, today we would call them influencers, right? But many of these prominent women are going to report that the so-called cure is going to relieve their chronic illnesses, whatever that might be, whether it's a backache, whether it's a stomach problem, whether it's, anything. And this becomes a fad that we call the spa movement. Okay. Now the spa movement, at the heart of the spa movement, you're going to find some really, well, I hate to keep using the word crazy, but I mean, we're going to find some really out there types of things that people are going to fall for. How about that? So I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. There we have him, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. Lordy, this guy, he's one of the ones that is going to push some incredibly invalid treatments, okay? John Harvey Kellogg is going to be arguably the most well-known and the most popular of the leaders of this type of movement. Now, Kellogg is, excuse me, let me take another drink, but Kellogg is going to be a guy who has some way out there ideas, as I said, but how's he going to promote these? Well, he's going to open a place called the Battle Creek Sanatorium. Okay, sanatorium. Again, it's going to be a spa. They're eventually just going to call it the San, S-A-N, the San. Now, it was usually called that by his devotees, by his people who had gone there and were convinced that he had the cure for whatever was ailing them. Now, there's a really good movie. If you can find it, I read the book years ago and I watched the movie years ago, but it is about, and it's it's called The Road to Wellville, and it's a novel. It's not a history book, but it's a funny and some ways very realistic and some ways very satirical look at John Harvey Kellogg's Battle Creek Sanatorium. There's a lot of realistic things mixed in there, along with some, some other, just again, some side stories that are just meant to be funny. But if you can watch that movie, and if you can email me, if you can find The Road to Wellville, if you can watch that and send me your thoughts on it, I would love to hear what you think about that movie, because I thought the book was great. I thought the movie was good at the time. I may have to watch it again once I get done narrating a lot of slides for classes. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, John Harvey Kellogg. Now he's going to push diet, exercise, fresh air, hydropathy, naturopathy. The body can heal itself. All these kinds of things. So he's going to push a lot of different pieces of this puzzle. Okay, you saw these women, and at this point, men who are usually pretty well off, as they had to be, going to these expensive places for, quote, the cure, okay, the spa, the sand in particular, right? Now, if you notice, Kellogg's products, okay, cornflakes are going to come from all of this, but Kellogg's are still, I believe, last time I checked, they are still headquartered in Battle Creek, Michigan. So anyway, the I think it's is it sanatorium? I have it spelled sanitarium up there. I don't know. There's a slight difference, but I think it's sanatorium with an O. But anyway, his spa is going to combine these luxurious things that you would find in a European spa and a fine hotel, things that you would have, I don't know, you would have all sorts of fine things around you, like great food. Well, I think that was probably a matter of opinion, but it was definitely served to you in very fine dining halls. You would have in Battle Creek Sanitarium, you're going to have hospital care to the best of what they could do. A lot of times they would take people suffering from many different things, and put them outside in the fresh air. Just put them out on the porch. And again, if you've ever been to Waverly Hills, you can go up there and go out on some of those porches where they would put the beds during the day. And it didn't matter if it was cold, if it was warm, you needed that fresh air, according to John Harvey Kellogg in particular, and treatment for tuberculosis in particular also. But they would put you out in the fresh air. Now, in the movie The Road to Wellville, they show that he had kind of rigged up an electric blanket type thing where it would sort of keep you warm while you were out there, and you would wear hats and mittens and all kinds of things. So it was pretty interesting. He would combine all sorts of things, but it was very glamorous if you were going to go there, and you didn't stay a couple of days. Okay, you would go there and linger. You would stay, if you had the money, you would stay there for months, right? Now, what about Kellogg? He was a Seventh-day Adventist, so he was a vegetarian, and he was a proponent, one of the ones who believed in this new, what I always put in quotes again, because that's what it was at the time, germ theory. Okay, remember, the whole idea of germ theory was that there are things that we're going to, eventually have figured out, microscopes, these things that are too small to see with your eye, that are making us sick, right? So he believed in that. And he's coming around, really, he's getting popular late 1800s, early 1900s. But he was an advocate of germ theory, and especially the vegetarian diet. So here's some of what he did. Now, we hear today about stuff like Activia, and we hear about probiotics and all of that. And he's kind of on the right track in this case, but I'm not sure this is the right way to go about it. He gave yogurt enemas every day to his patients, okay, to repopulate the intestines with good bacteria. That's a good time to change slides. So, again, as I said, lots of fresh air, but he also required a very plain diet. Now, part of his plain diet, again, is going to lead to cornflakes. Okay? Now, look at the heart of it all, though. Look at the heart of what he's trying to fight against ultimately. And go back to what I said earlier about menstruation and all the parts of life, puberty and menopause, everything being treated as an illness. Okay. Again, we see that here. Okay. The plain diet is to really help avoid masturbation or having sex. Now, again, we use the words stimulating food or drink. Okay, because remember they said if a girl had not gone into puberty yet, that a lot of the doctors at the time, so-called doctors sometimes, were saying feed her a bland diet or just vegetables or whatever. So, yeah, this plain bland diet, they don't want you to eat any stimulating food or drink. So, wow, if you do get to watch the movie The Road to Wellville, you'll see how they show the food that they're eating and how it's not particularly stimulating even for your taste buds. So that's a big thing. Now you're not allowed to have any sex while you're under treatment. And actually, John Harvey Kellogg believed that you shouldn't have sex at all. He believed, again, he had some pretty out there stuff, but he believed that that was a waste of his bodily fluids or of your bodily fluids and so on. And he and his wife are going to adopt many children. Okay. So anyway, cornflakes came about to kind of combat the urge to have sex or masturbate. So gotta love John Harvey Kellogg. Next slide. All right, here we got some of the interesting inventions. You got the ultraviolet ray dental lamp. That's interesting. Okay, ultraviolet rays. And then you've got over here the irrigating bag to the head. So this is going to keep some cold water on your head all the time. And up at the very top in that tiny little figure 167. And these are from a really old book. Really, there's some amazing old books, that old health books that have these things in them. It's amazing to me to look at some of these. But in that little tiny one up there at the top, figure 167, very cold compress and ice bag to the head. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide.